Hello, this is Mike Fish from Minnesota Real Estate and Management, and today we're going to discuss the pros and cons of someone who has a current lake home when it comes to selling or doing a short-term rental. I get multiple calls a week from folks that go, okay, I've got this cabin, thinking about taking it over. It was my grandparents. Things have changed. We're busy. We're not using it as much. Asking me, should I do a short-term rental? So that's a great question. And I will tell you that we're blessed enough to be busy enough here that we give people the best honest advice we can have that's best for them. Not that we're not willing to take on the right property and take on more rental properties, but we certainly have enough. And quite frankly, whether we're helping somebody sell the property or we're helping them develop a short-term rental, quite frankly, it all shakes out for us either way. So what I want to do is I want to talk about some pros and cons. If you're considering, do I sell or do I rent? Let's talk about that. So the first question is really kind of, what's your goal? I always tell people, of course, if you can hang on to the house for several years, they're not making more of this. We've seen the values go up and up and up and up. Quite frankly, if the hassle, the initial cost, the return on your investment makes sense, people are, more likely to say, hey, let's do a short-term rental. That's why we have so many of them, right? Now, that being said, I've also seen the short-term rentals in just Crow Wing go from about 150 to over 350, and we're constantly throwing them on. So there is a saturation point. To be honest, it's not as easy as it used to be. Yeah, that's another conversation. But what I want to do is I want to talk about, go through some pros, go through some cons, give you a few things to think about, and then reach out to me if you want to continue a conversation, if you're considering going either direction. The obvious advantage of selling the property is the immediate payout, right? We are in just a phenomenally strong market. And I could go on and on about that. Few of my recent sales, we had one that they bought for $650 less than 5 years ago. We sold for $921. Another one they bought for $550 4 or 5 years ago. We sold for $880. So there's no doubt at all that the market's strong. Softened a little bit over this year. We expect next spring to be stronger. I always ask all sellers, what are you trying to do? Like, what's your goal, right? So you can sell this place, where are you gonna park the money, right? So it's something to consider. So obviously the immediate payout is a number one goal, right? You also are mitigating the concerns, all the maintenance concerns, the tax concerns, the headaches of, owning a lake home if you're not up here every day. I would say that is something to consider. Some people sell and they buy down in Florida or somewhere else, right? I would say the con of it is you're missing out on the future appreciation. We know it's going to be worth so much more 5 years ago or 10 years ago, depending on what your mortgage is on it, if you owe on it, what your costs are. You're missing out on that short-term rental revenue, right? Which can be fairly substantial depending on the property. Like, we've got properties that are netting, as low as 30. We've also got properties that are netting pushing 100, 150 if it's developed right in the right area and the right property. So the question becomes, do we really want to do a short-term rental, right? And I guess I would say for most of our owners, and kind of our comfort zone is people who are using their property from time to time. They block it out when they want to use it for friends and family, and we fill it up when they're not using it, right? So of course the biggest pro to keeping the property is you have the property, right? For your use, for your family's use. We're filling it up when you're not using it. And I've had several that people have said, oh, we're going to be up on a regular basis. And when they start seeing the money roll in and life gets busy, they maybe come up a couple times a year. I've got other people that say, oh, we're never going to use it. And then they go for a year or two and kind of change their mind and use it more. So I would say that's definitely a strong pro, is you've got a lake home to use if you're ever going to use it, right? Again, the con of it is that the money's tied up in it, obviously, and you've got the risk the liability, the headache, of the maintenance, and everything that comes with a short-term rental. Now, we carry most of that as a management company. We're carrying most of that for you, which is certainly an advantage of partnering up with a company like ours. I would say during my discussions with literally hundreds of people, a big part of that decision of whether they want to do a short-term rental or they don't, I would say it as a con, as a negative to consider, is the ongoing hassle and worry, the setup time. Our average owners, at least, probably our average is 3 to 6 months. For the vast majority of people, the $5,000 to $10,000 in inventory that needs to be set up. The rates you can actually get for it because of the saturation point, the damage, the wear and tear. I had one recently that I'm actually have for sale right now down in Platte Lake. Really nice home, considering do we sell, do we short-term rental. I walk in, just a beautiful remodel, all this immaculate woodwork, and part of that conversation was, you run 200-300 people a year through this thing, in 3 to 5 years, all this is going to have to be repaired, right? So those are things to consider. There is a wear and tear to a property when you're doing a short-term rental, and that is just the facts. And this is obviously for, as a full-service management company, we mitigate a ton of the risk. We handle a lot of things, but there is a reality if you're going to short-term rental of the wear and tear on the property, and it's a pretty big consideration. So I would never say that a house is too nice to rent. Obviously, there's people that are renting $3 million places for, $2,500 a night, plus. That being said, it is a consideration. When you're doing a short-term rental, you are going to have the wear and tear. I always say price is exclusive. So part of it is, hey, I've got clients that go, we're just not going to rent our property for under $1,000 a night. We'll let it sit empty. Well, that's something to consider. Of course, that affects your end return on your investment, your end, net each year, if that's how you want, if that's a balance you have. Every property, every owner is different. Of course, as I mentioned in other videos, you've got to be careful of what the regulations are, right down to the city and of course the county. Those are considerations. For example, not to beat up on Mille Lacs, but if you're in Mille Lacs, you got to be ADA compliant, and that cost can easily be $40,000-$50,000 to become ADA compliant if you want to do a short-term rental. So depending on where you are, there are those considerations, whether you want to sell or whether you want to do a short-term rental, as far as the restrictions and the covenants and things like that. Also, it's important to understand lake per lake. There's a massive difference of what you can get, obviously, on Gull Lake, compared to what you're getting on a smaller lake. So taking the time to analyze your potential net if you do a short-term rental is important. We've got other trainings and videos that go into that, but that is kind of the balance. Well, at the end of the day, what we do is we take the time to show people, here's a very possible net each year. And are you better off, let's say the net is $60,000 a year. Are you better off, and again, I always have to say, I'm not an attorney, I'm not an accountant, so sit down with your tax professional. Are you better off netting $60K a year for the next, several years with the cons of doing a short-term rental? Or are you better off taking all that cash up front by selling the property today and moving the money somewhere else, right? There's another kind of way to look at it. So I know some people like just kind of the mental breakdown, and I always encourage people, write everything out. So if you're going to write down your list, right? Cash flow, big cash today is obviously the biggest pro of selling. An annual return on your investment, yeah, that might be, depending on what you're doing with the money, that might be more on the short-term side, right? Long-term equity, definitely more on the short-term side, right? Work and responsibility, though, that's definitely all on the short-term side, right? That's why people hire us. I always say people have a life, They're busy. We're one of the more comprehensive short-term rental management companies in the area, and we're taking 90% of that off your plate. Tax benefits for most people, definitely on the short-term rental side, depending on obviously what you're doing with the money, right? But it usually comes down to more a personal decision. Do you have family that loves the property and wants to continue to use the property, right? Uh, as far as the market goes, when you're in a great market, selling, awesome. There is a future risk because we don't know, we don't have a crystal ball, and we don't know what the market is going to bring, right? As far as the use of the property, your lifestyle and what you want personally, that's probably the biggest question for most people. Some people call because, contact us because they have to sell or they have to rent. Other people call us because maybe they might want to sell or they might want to rent. So this is more of it's a very personal decision. What I always tell people is you never get an ounce of pressure from me. We're not into manipulating people one way or another. These are huge personal decisions. My job as a broker is to give people perspective, help them maybe think through things, maybe help them to make the right decision for them to the extent that I can do that. But sometimes, to be honest, I've got many people on my long-term follow-up list that I've talked to about selling for years, or talked to about maybe doing a VRBO for years. I always say real estate is all about timing, and I sleep well at night because we don't get too involved in those decisions. Again, our job is just to give perspective, give people some thought processes, and do our best to analyze what the property is likely going to sell for if you're going to sell it in this market today, or what it's going to likely rent for if you're going to rent it in this market today. And then it's time for each individual to go back, do some soul searching based off their situation, and make the decision that's best for them. So feel free to call me. I love the calls. I get sometimes 3-4 calls a week. I've got this property, do I sell or do I rent? And we are busy enough that we are not going to try and convince you to do anything. I help people regularly. I wish I could bring on some testimonials. Talked to many people over the years that they called me and said, hey, I'm thinking about managing this myself. What do you think? I'm still here to help them. This is a huge pie, and I pride myself in being an advocate for short-term rentals and doing it the right way, and I'm willing to help you either way, because either I'm a good fit for you or I'm not. And I've been doing this long enough over the years to know that if I'm not a good fit, it's not comfortable for me or the owner. So again, you'll never get an ounce of pressure from us, but reach out and we can help you think through these things a bit to make the decision that's right for you and for yourself. So this is Mike Fish with Minnesota Real Estate and Management. Thank you for watching this. Depending on where you see it, please like it, subscribe, stay in touch. We're building this content because we feel like it may be valuable to folks out there based off the calls and conversations we have. And we do hope at some point to earn your trust and business. Thank you.